Okay, this is going to be my extended runtime fuel kit for the Chinese-made generators that use the RATO, R-A-T-O 212cc engine. It's very similar to the ones that use the Predator 212cc engine. The Power Horse 3500, the Predator 3500, and the Echo Bearcat all use the Predator 212cc engine. And in fact, the generators are all the same, except for the color and a couple of little decals. On the generators that use the RATO, or RATO 212cc engine, again, they're all the same, with the exception of the color of the casing and so forth. For the purpose of this video, I will be shooting the video on a WEN 3800 generator. Don't let it get you upset if you have a generator that is a different brand for marketing purposes. Once you look at it and realize that the cases are the same shape and everything else, and the generator is the same shape, it's just a different color on the housing, and it's marketed to a different channel. At any rate, this is the WEN 3800 engine, or generator with the WEN 3800 engine. The first step is going to be to pull the cases off. This side cover comes off with 2 Phillips head screws. This other side cover also comes off with 2 Phillips head screws. Now this side has the recoil start rope coming through it. So what we're going to do is pull the cover off, extend the recoil start rope just a little bit, and let the cover hang down here so it's out of our way. And now we're ready to get started. So the first thing you'll do is pull the spark plug cap off and just push it up just out of the way just a little bit. Then pull the breather hose off, set that off to the side. We're going to go ahead and pull the valve cover off. When you pull the valve cover off, be as careful as possible not to damage the gasket. Okay, this one came off nice and clean. The gasket is still in there. Let me go over something here real quickly. I called WEN at the 1-800 line for customer service to find out about getting replacement valve cover gaskets for these. They have one replacement valve cover gasket in the country. Pretty sad. Until I can locate a vendor to provide me with valve cover gaskets for these to include in the kit, the kits are going to come with a tube of Permatex RTV gasket sealant material. It's just an RTV silicone, and I'll show you when I go to reassemble the thing. Most people make the mistake of using too much gasket sealer. You don't spread it on like a child's making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and having it squeeze out all over the place. That actually causes more harm than good. You want just a fine, fine layer. And I'll go into greater detail on that when I get ready to do the reassembly. The next step is we're going to remove the PCV valve. This little disc right here is the PCV valve. All it is a one-way valve. So when the piston comes down, it pressurizes the crankcases, it blows air out through this into the breather chamber. Then whenever the piston goes back up again, it creates a vacuum in the crankcases and it pulls this shut so that it does not suck air back into the crankcases. And that's the purpose of the PCV valve. There's a couple of ways to disable the PCV valve. We can either bend the valve body itself, you could either take a pair of needle nose pliers and bend the valve body, or you can take one of the small zip ties included in the kit and we're going to zip tie it open. So that would be the zip tied version. You'll see here is the PCV valve body, and it's held open by the zip tie. You'll put the PCV valve gasket back into place and bolt the whole thing back in where it used to be. If you were to have damaged the gasket on the PCV valve or breather plate, you could use the gasket sealant that comes in the kit on that as well. Incidentally, if anybody finds a good source, a reliable source for replacement gaskets, please contact me and I will get these gaskets and start including them in the kit, because I would prefer to put a whole new gasket on as opposed to using gasket sealant on a used gasket. However, that's what we're stuck with. So I've got this wiped down clean. Okay. The gasket sealant, you'll see, is in a sealed tube, and you'll take the little probe that's on the cap, turn the cap upside down, and push in on it, and that breaks the seal on the gasket sealant. As I said earlier, a lot of people make the mistake of putting way too much gasket sealant on. The gasket sealant should not be super heavy. You just want a fine layer, enough to seal any imperfections. and then we'll go ahead and put this valve cover back on. If your existing valve cover had torn, then you would have to put more gasket sealant right around the place where it had torn and do your best to patch in the gasket. I'm just putting it on here just as a demonstration to show you how to put the gasket sealant on, and as you can see, it's not a real heavy layer. These two screws don't feel quite right. When you're putting the screws in, if they feel like something's wrong, pull them out and check the alignment. Don't just crank down on them. Next, included in the kit is a bag of small parts, one of which happens to be the flash drive with the copy of this video that we're shooting right now on it. There are two different sizes of hose clamps in the bag. There's a small hose clamp for the 3/16 hoses and a larger hose clamp for the 1/4 inch hoses. The kit comes with a fully assembled PCV valve, a genuine Yamaha fuel hose. Do not try mixing and matching parts. I use the Yamaha fuel fittings. They are compatible with the other Yamaha fuel fittings. They are totally different than the Evinrude, and just different enough from the Mercury that they will not work. So if you buy Mercury fuel fittings to replace the ones in the kit that you have misplaced or wanted extra or something like that, and the kit does not work, I know why. You must use Yamaha fuel fittings. Another thing is, don't use a Yamaha some of these different aftermarket hoses to replace the Yamaha hose with. Yamaha has two sizes of hoses. You'll notice that this is the smaller 6mm size, or this is the 8mm size here. We use the 6mm size because it's smaller on the smaller engines because you get better capillary action. If you start using a larger hose, like some of the aftermarket hoses are 3/8 of an inch diameter, they will not work. If you purchased an aftermarket hose or something like that and it's not working, don't call me. Get the correct hose. I sell them on my website and it'll work good again. At any rate, don't go mixing and matching any of the components. Okay, you will also get a section of 1/4 inch hose, approximately 5 feet long. You're going to wind up throwing away a little bit of it because there's more than you need. This is the fuel pump, and it's going to be positioned right about here. So the next step that we're going to do, make sure that the fuel selector valve is in the off position. On these it'll say auto off, and the reason it does that is the auto off is shutting off just the fuel, and with these generators, if you run it in the auto off position until the generator stalls, they claim that it is getting all the fuel out of the float bowl. Actually it's not. It's getting the fuel out of the float bowl down to the level of the bottom of the emulsifier tube. Still leaves a little bit of fuel in the float bowl. So using this little trick will not keep you from having fuel going oxidized, or as a lot of people refer to it as varnishing of the fuel. It's a nice step. It's more of a marketing breakthrough than an engineering breakthrough. The next thing we're going to do is, now that we've got the fuel selector valve in off position, there's a hose on the output side. I don't know if you can see that on video or not. But it uses a Corbin clamp, and I'm going to go ahead and remove it, and then we'll pull it out so you can see a much better view of it. Okay, you'll see that the hose has a preformed end that's bent to 90 degrees. This is a Corbin clamp right here. Oop. To remove the Corbin clamp, what you do is you take a pair of pliers and you squeeze on the two sides, which shoots it across the road. At any rate, if you squeeze on the two sides, it opens up the clamp, and then you just wiggle it back off the hose. Go ahead and remove the Corbin clamp. You won't be reusing this clamp. You notice that the fuel hose that went onto the side of the fuel selector valve has a bend in it. There's two fuel hoses that go to the fuel selector valve. One runs from the fuel tank to the selector valve. The other runs from the selector valve to the carburetor. And that's the one that you removed from the selector valve right here. The end that goes to the carburetor, you leave it there. You're not going to be taking it off the carburetor because you're going to reuse this hose. Now if you look at the fuel pump, this fitting right here has a small letter P on it, as in pulse line. This line here, that's parallel to the pulse line, has a small arrow pointing in, and that's fuel going into the fuel pump. And then this one has an arrow pointing out of the fuel pump, and of course that's fuel coming out of the fuel pump. That goes to the carburetor. So from the output side of the fuel pump, we put the original hose. And now we're going to get one of the small hose clamps that comes in the kit. And you just squeeze it down on. So now that's nicely sealed. Then in the kit, you're going to get a section of 3/16 fuel hose, approximately 10 inches long. Take that and another one of the small hose clamps, and the fitting that this hose came off of, you're going to slide this hose on. Then you're going to slide the hose clamp onto the end of it and squeeze it down to where it clamps onto the fuel fitting or the fuel selector valve, nice and snug. Okay. I don't know if you can see that clearly or not. Here's the get something I can point with. This is the hose that we just installed, and you notice it is slid on to the fitting here that points sideways. It's fairly easy for us to see here with our naked eye, but I'm sure it's difficult with the camera. So the fitting that points out toward you is the fitting that you slide this hose on. The one that points straight back is the one that runs from the fuel tank to the selector valve. Don't tamper with that. You'll never touch that hose during the installation of this kit. So now that we've got this hose slid onto the fitting that points towards us, we're going to take this clamp, we're going to go ahead and slide it up onto the fitting. Let me get my head in there to see, and then I'll back out of the way so you can get a shot with the camera. Okay. If you look now, you'll see this white hose clamp is clamped into place. So now we're going to take the fuel pump, we're going to push it up here, and that's where it's going to rest at. The kit will come with an adapter to go from 3/16 hose to 1/4 inch hose. We're going to put the adapter into this 3/16. We're going to use another hose clamp, and here you can see how the hose clamps work real clearly. Then we're going to cut a small section of hose clamp, or hose. This is cut off of the 5-foot section of 1/4 inch hose that comes in the kit. Cut a section 1.5 inches long, and that's going to go on to the 3/16 to 1/4 adapter. And then we'll take a 1/4 inch clamp the larger of the two sizes. Okay. Then we're going to take another section of the 1/4 inch hose, cut it 8.5 inches long. Take a T-fitting, put the 8.5 inch section on the side of the T-fitting, this section of the T-fitting into the 1.5 inch section of hose. Put a hose clamp onto this. You notice that I'm putting hose clamps on all the fuel carrying hoses, obviously because they're carrying gasoline. We don't want them to leak at all. Then put a clamp here on this one. Squeeze it down tight. This is going to be the fuel line that goes from your remote tank and from the stock tank into the fuel pump. So you're going to connect this to this port on the fuel pump, one with the arrow pointing inward. We're going to tuck it up in here where it's going to rest. Just make sure that everything is nice and smooth and there's no kinks in the hoses. This is a drain line for the evaporative emission canister. In case somebody overfills the stock tank, it will run out through the stock tank vent into the evaporative emissions canister. If it fills the evaporative emissions canister, it then drains out. And this is just an activated charcoal canister. Take another one of the clamps included in the kit. And squeeze it down. And make sure that the fuel pump still sits nicely in there. Take the remainder of the hose that came in the kit and just feed it above the cylinder head, right through here. You're going to poke it right across, and you can see plenty of daylight on the other side where it's going. With this end here, you're going to hook it to this side of the T-fitting. And then you're going to take another hose clamp included in the kit. Okay. And that's going to nicely tuck down into here. You'll notice that there is a hole drilled in the metal bracket. And that's one of the few things that I really like about this generator is some of the Chinese import generators like Boley and Champion, they have an engine bolted to a small metal frame or some small metal brackets, and that's bolted to the bottom of the plastic casing, and everything is plastic and it twists all over the place. This particular generator uses a steel lower frame, a steel upper frame. See what I mean? It's magnetic. So you got the steel lower frame, steel upper frame, and then side frames that are steel. So the generator kind of holds its shape and is less likely to be damaged during transport and so on. Some of these Chinese generators are very, very fragile, and if you just make faces at them, they collapse on you. That is one of the few things I like about this one. It seems to be a fairly competent generator. It's got a full metal frame on it, so it won't just totally go to mush in no time at all. They could have done a lot worse, so for the price, they did a pretty good job. At any rate, we're going to take one of the zip ties included in the kit. We're going to feed it through that hole, bend it around, and just loosely put it in place for right now. We'll be tightening it down later on. Now, the kit comes with a fully assembled PCV valve. The PCV valve, the hoses just carry air. So if there is a leak at the hoses, it doesn't leak fuel. You're going to get enough clamps in the kit that you can put clamps on every last one of these fittings. If you clamp up all the fittings so that you have no air leaks whatsoever, you'll get a better dry lift value from the pump. Right now the kits are tuned so that you should get 16 inches of dry lift. In other words, the fuel tank should be sitting on the ground and the generator should be sitting on the ground. It is not a gravity feed system, that's why it has a pump in it. The generator can be no more than 16 inches above the bottom of the fuel tank. So if the tank is sitting at this level, the generator is sitting at this level, at no time should you have the generator more than 16 inches above the tank, because that's the dry lift value of the pump. If you're running into issues where you might just need a little bit more dry lift, you can put clamps on all these hoses here to eliminate the possibility of any air leaks, and that'll increase your lift value slightly. Okay, so you remember you took this hose off that went from the valve cover to the air box. You're going to take the clear section of hose and slide it onto the valve cover. Then we'll take white plastic hose clamp included in the kit. Now this hose clamp is extremely important because keep in mind this gets hot, and so this can soften up the rubber hoses a little bit, and under extreme circumstances it may push this hose off. So we're going to put a clamp on it. You'll notice that there's a groove in the air box. It's almost like they put it there just for us. Yeah, fat chance, huh? Take the drain line off the evaporative emissions canister and hold it out of the way. This will come around here and it will plug on to the last port of the fuel pump. So you see that this is pushed in? So now your fuel pump is slightly behind this cover panel. Your hose that runs from the fuel pump to the carburetor is not kinked or bent in any way. It does have a 90-degree formed hose, and that was originally in the generator. So now with this running through this little groove that they made just for us, you go ahead and put your drain line back in place, and there's a little hole in the bottom of the housing that you'll fit this drain line back through, and there you can see it pokes through the bottom, and then you'll snap this strain relief right into that bracket. So now your pulse line with the PCV valve runs right through this little arc. The fuel pump is in place. With the fuel pump in place now, you can take this hose or this zip tie and just snug it down. That way nothing's going anywhere. This is going to be your new breather line. It's going to curve up and around and plug into the original breather line. They went straight from the valve cover to the air box. Now on this adapter, take and push the breather hose all the way over the hose barb area and the stops to where the two hoses almost, well, they do touch. And then slide this end back onto where it originally went on the airbox. So now it makes a nice loop. This is probably as good a time as any to go ahead and put that spark plug cap back on, because if you forget to put the spark plug back on, the engine is not going to run at all. It's got a little rubber grommet with 2 tabs, but you want to make sure and spin that around. Not that it provides a whole lot of function. Their idea is it'll stop airflow, which is not a critical thing, but it's certainly more aesthetically pleasing, and it makes it look like you knew what you were doing if you put it on correctly, so that way it lines up and it looks nice. So now you've got the fuel input line and the fuel breather, or excuse me, the breather hose running around here. We're going to take a 9/64 drill bit. Right over here. You've got a plastic flange here. We're going to drill a 9/64 drill hole right through here, and the only reason is so that then we can zip tie these 2 hoses in place so they don't flop around. That's not a critical portion, but it just looks cleaner if you don't have hoses going anywhere. And this is a plastic flange, and we're just going to drill about 6 millimeters over from the edge. So now it just looks a little cleaner this way. Like I say, it would do no harm if these flopped around a little bit. In fact, if you looked at the original cover when you pulled it off, you'll notice that there was a line worn into the foam where the hose from the evaporative emissions canister rested. Okay. You remember this hose that we passed over the top of the engine, and it comes out this side. What we're going to do is we're going to take this hose and we're going to run it around in a loop pointing up. We're going to put our fuel inlet fitting right here, and this is where the hose from the remote tank is going to snap into the generator. And that'll be this fitting here. I'm going to use a unibit to drill the hole, and then I'll clean it up with a repairman's reamer when we get real close to the right size. You can use a regular drill bit or a repairman's reamer or a deburring knife, or in a pinch you can use a good quality pocket knife to go ahead and clean it up. And if you stick your fingers under here, you can feel there's foam. Don't let the foam worry you. You can tear out a little piece of foam. There's a gusset that runs along here. You don't want to hit the gusset because that'll interfere with the way this tightens down. So I'm going to center it between this rubber plug and this gusset, because then there's plenty of room. And with the step drill, be careful. If you go too deep, it becomes too big a hole. So you check it every now and then with your fitting that you're going to be putting into it. Okay, and now I can clean it up with the Repairman's wringer. And this is just going to deburr it. Okay. Included in the kit is going to be some Teflon tape. Take the Teflon tape and wrap it over the threaded portion. Do not over wrap the end. If you cut across like this, that piece is going to get tore up or torn loose, and now it's going to get caught in the fuel filter and clog up the fuel filter a little bit. So stay just back from the ends of the thread. And again, it just makes it a cleaner, more professional looking install. The way the kit is laid out, it wouldn't cause extreme damage because it would get caught in the filter. So we're going to put a few layers of Teflon tape. About 3 layers should be plenty. And that's going to screw onto this hose barb. And you're going to screw the two down to where the plastic housing is pinched right between here, so it kind of holds it firm. Trying to get my wrench on there is easier said than done. Let me grab a shorter wrench. Much better. Okay, ultimately, I want the fitting to be pointing that direction. It doesn't have to be, but it's just a nice cleaner look, because then the fuel hose can lay on top of the generator and it's not going to put any side force where it goes into the valve. So we're going to go ahead and spin this and then finish tightening it up. The fuel fitting pointing in that direction. And like I said, now whenever the fuel hose lays across here, it doesn't have a sharp bend where it comes out of the fuel fitting. Now you're going to take this hose that we ran around from the other side of the engine, and I'm going to go ahead and slide it onto the hose barb. We're going to take another one of the large clamps. Oh, that was a small clamp. Large clamp. Slide it up and squeeze it into place. Okay. Then, included in the kit is a fuel filter. There's a small arrow on the fuel filter that points in the direction of fuel flow, which is from here through to here. Now that you've got the hose in place, you can look at it and determine where would be the best position for the fuel filter. I'm going to cut this end here, right here at this point. And again, because this hose is holding gasoline, I'm going to put a clamp on it. You'll notice that I put this fuel filter in backward. Okay. Make sure and do that as you're putting it together. The fuel runs from the tank to the generator, so make sure that that arrow is pointing in the right direction. Okay. Now you can trim this end to whatever length it needs to be. And actually, that's a nice arc right where it is. I'm going to take 1 inch off of it. I'm not going to take the entire length of the fuel filter, because this way, if you change the fuel filter and you damage the end of the hose or something like that years from now, you've still got enough hose left to make a repair. And let's face it, you do want these things to last for years and years and years. And again, and I'm just squeezing it this way just to make sure it all lines up nice and straight. That way if somebody's working on it later on, they don't say, wow, the guy that installed this sure was clumsy. So then you're going to look at it and make sure that everything's in a nice, smooth arcs. There's no kinks in it or anything like that. Once you've looked it over, you can go ahead and put the side cover back on. The side cover's a lot easier to put on if you take the oil door off first. And you slide these little lock tabs down into place. With that done, put your 2 Phillips head screws in. Then you can put your oil door. Then you notice that there's a place in the foam rubbed through, and that was where the oil drain was tucked in. And that does no harm. Then on the other side, you'll notice that there's a place where the original evaporative emissions line was rubbing against it, and that does no harm. And what we're going to have now, when we put it back together, in a few months of running, this hose here will make a rub line through here. Again, don't let that concern you. You'll notice they weren't real neat and careful when they glued the foam in or anything else. They just kind of haphazarded. Look at everything before you put the cover on. All the hoses are nice smooth arcs. There's no kinks or anything like that. And as I stated earlier, but it bears repeating, do not substitute locally improvised parts for any of the components in my kit. If you lose or damage something, contact me, because these kits were worked out to actually function correctly. It wasn't just something that I threw together last night. It's something that I do a lot of testing and a lot of development on to make sure that everything works properly as a set. And if you get too large a diameter hose, it's like trying to suck soda through one of those great big kids' straws. It doesn't work as well. A smaller straw will give you better capillary action, and that smaller diameter 6mm hose gives better capillary action on this. Being that this is only a 212cc engine, it doesn't require much fuel. So it works better if the hose is a smaller diameter, so it can get a reliable fuel draw. Now, the next part of the kit is the fuel tank. My kits do not supply a fuel tank because different people are going to want different sizes of fuel tanks. And also, if you happen to be living in Alaska or Oregon or California, you'd be paying to ship a giant box of air across the country. The fuel tanks are available at marine distributors and so forth. They all use a quarter pipe fitting, and that's what this is. I know it looks like it's a 1/2 inch diameter, but they call it quarter pipe because the inside diameter is 1/4 inch. Bass Pro Shops carries outboard motor fuel tanks. Just about any boat dealer will carry outboard motor fuel tanks. On my website, there's a link to go to, I believe it's either Atwood or Moeller, to look at their website for the different size of tanks that they make for them. They make all the way from a 3-gallon to a 100-gallon fuel tank, so whatever you want. My own personal preference is a 6-gallon, because at my age and my health and my back, lifting a 40 or 50 pound fuel tank full of gas is about all I really want to do. But it comes with one fuel fitting that you screw into the tank. Then on the hose that connects it, there's an arrow, and you want the arrow pointing in the direction of fuel flow. And we'll go ahead and demonstrate the generator running in a couple minutes here, but that should just about do it. I thank you for your watching this video.